The phone rang 3 times before a small voice answered. James Richardson had expected to hear the voice of Elena Martinez, the job applicant who had missed her interview that morning. Instead, he heard something that made his heart stop. "Hello." The voice was tiny, maybe 7 years old, with a slight tremor that suggested tears. James looked at his phone screen, double-checking the number. This was definitely the right contact information for the woman who was supposed to interview for the accounting position at Richardson Industries. He cleared his throat, trying to adjust his tone for a child. "Hi there. Is your mommy home?" There was a long pause, and James could hear sniffling on the other end. When the little girl spoke again, her words hit him like a truck. "Mommy can't come to the phone right now. She's crying in the bathroom because we might have to sleep in the car tonight." James felt his chest tighten. In his 42 years, 30 of which had been spent building his billion-dollar empire, he had never heard anything so heartbreaking. The innocence in the child's voice made it even worse. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked gently. "Sophie. Are you the mean man from the bank?" "Mommy said the mean man might call today." "No, I'm not from the bank. I'm someone who wanted to talk to your mommy about a job." Another pause. James could hear muffled sobbing in the background, and his heart broke a little more. "The job interview? Mommy wanted to go so bad, but Mrs. Garcia got sick and couldn't watch me. Mommy said she couldn't leave me alone because I'm only 7 and something bad might happen." James closed his eyes. He had been annoyed that morning when Elena Martinez didn't show up for her interview. He had even made a sarcastic comment to his assistant about people wasting his time. Now he felt sick about it. "Mommy's been practicing her answers in the mirror for days," Sophie continued, her voice getting smaller. "She bought a special dress from the thrift store and everything. But then Mrs. Garcia called this morning and said she had to go to the hospital." The background crying got louder, and James heard a door open. "Sophie, who are you talking to?" A woman's voice, thick with tears and exhaustion. "The job man, Mommy. He's not mean like the bank man." There was rustling as the phone was taken away, and then Elena's voice came through, shaky and embarrassed. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Richardson. I know I missed the interview. I can explain." "Mrs. Martinez," James interrupted, his voice softer than it had been in years. "You don't need to explain anything right now. Are you and your daughter safe?" The question seemed to surprise her. There was silence for a moment. We're fine. Just going through a rough patch." James looked around his corner office, at the expensive art on the walls and the view of the city skyline. He thought about the little girl who had answered the phone, worried about sleeping in a car. "Mrs. Martinez, I'd like to reschedule our interview. Would tomorrow morning work for you?" I appreciate that, but I still don't have childcare. The daycare costs more than I make in a day and—" "Bring Sophie with you," James said without thinking. "My office has a play area for employees' children. She'll be safe while we talk." Elena was quiet for so long that James thought the call had dropped. "Mr. Richardson, why are you being so kind to us? You don't even know us." James looked out his window at the busy street below, where people hurried past each other without making eye contact. He thought about how long it had been since anyone had asked him about kindness. "Sometimes a phone call can change everything," he said simply. "I'll see you tomorrow at 10. After he hung up, James sat in his leather chair for a long time, thinking about Sophie's innocent words and Elena's quiet dignity. He had built his fortune by being tough and decisive, but something about that conversation had shaken him to his core. He buzzed his assistant, Patricia, who had worked for him for 15 years. "Patricia, I need you to do something for me. Find out everything you can about Elena Martinez. But be discreet about it." "Is there a problem, Mr. Richardson?" James thought about Sophie's small voice asking if he was the mean man from the bank. He thought about Elena practicing interview answers in a mirror and buying a dress from a thrift store. "No," he said quietly. "I think there might finally be a solution." That night, James couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the conversation, replaying Sophie's words in his mind. He had started his company with nothing, building it into one of the most successful consulting firms in the country. He had everything money could buy, but he couldn't remember the last time he had felt truly moved by anything. The image of a mother and daughter potentially sleeping in their car haunted him. He knew what it was like to have nothing. He had grown up in foster care, bouncing from home to home until he aged out of the system at 18. But he had never had a child depending on him during those dark times. At 3 in the morning, he found himself in his home office, researching homeless services and emergency assistance programs. He told himself he was just being thorough, preparing for the interview. But deep down, he knew something had fundamentally shifted in him during that phone call. The next morning couldn't come fast enough. James arrived at his office earlier than usual the next morning, something that surprised even Patricia. He had spent most of the night thinking about Elena and Sophie Martinez, and the few hours of sleep he managed were filled with dreams of a little girl's voice asking about sleeping in cars. "Good morning, Mr. Richardson," Patricia said, looking up from her computer. "I have that information you requested about Elena Martinez." James took the folder she handed him, but hesitated before opening it. Something felt invasive about reading details of someone's life when they were clearly struggling. Still, he needed to understand what he was dealing with. Elena Martinez, 28 years old, had been working as a freelance bookkeeper since losing her full-time accounting job 6 months ago. She had a degree in accounting from a community college and excellent references from her previous employers. The reason for leaving her last job made James's jaw clench. The company had downsized, and as the newest employee, she was the first to go. She lived in a small apartment in the Riverside district with her daughter Sophie, who was 7 years old and attended Lincoln Elementary School. There was no mention of a father in the picture. Elena's credit report showed she was 3 months behind on rent and had maxed out 2 credit cards trying to keep up with bills. The most heartbreaking detail was at the bottom of the report. Elena had applied for over 50 jobs in the past 6 months. Richardson Industries was her latest hope. James closed the folder and rubbed his temples. He had grown up with nothing, but he had only had himself to worry about. The idea of being responsible for a child while everything fell apart around you was something that terrified him more than any business deal ever had. At exactly 10 o'clock, Patricia's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Richardson, Elena Martinez is here for her interview. Send them in, please." James stood up, straightening his tie, then realized how ridiculous that was. He loosened it instead, trying to look less intimidating. The door opened, and Elena Martinez walked in holding the hand of a small girl with pigtails and big brown eyes. Elena was prettier than James had expected, with long dark hair pulled back in a neat bun and wearing a navy blue dress that was clearly inexpensive but well maintained. She looked nervous but determined. Sophie looked around the office with wide eyes, taking in the tall windows and expensive furniture. "Wow," she whispered to her mother. "This is like a castle." Elena's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Sophie, remember what we talked about?" Indoor voice. James couldn't help but smile. "It's okay. Would you like to see the play area, Sophie?" He led them to a corner of his office that had been set up years ago when one of his employees needed to bring her children to work during a school closure. There were toys, books, and a small table with coloring supplies. Sophie's eyes lit up. "Mommy, can I really play here?" Elena nodded, and Sophie immediately went to explore the books. James watched her for a moment, remembering how fascinated he had been by simple things when he was her age. "She's beautiful," he said to Elena. "Thank you. She's everything to me." Elena's voice was soft but fierce with protectiveness. They sat down across from each other at James's conference table. Elena had brought a folder with her resume and references, her hands shaking slightly as she opened it. "Mr. Richardson, I want to apologize again for missing yesterday's interview. I know your time is valuable and—" "Please," James interrupted. "Let's start over. Tell me about yourself, Elena. Not your resume, you. Who are you?" The question seemed to surprise her. She glanced over at Sophie, who was quietly looking at picture books. "I'm a single mother trying to do right by my daughter. I've been working since I was 16, put myself through college while pregnant with Sophie. I'm good with numbers, I'm reliable, and I work harder than anyone you'll ever meet because I have to." There was no self-pity in her voice, just simple truth. James found himself leaning forward, genuinely interested. "What happened at your last job?" Elena's jaw tightened slightly. "Budget cuts. Last hired, first fired. They said it wasn't personal, just business." She looked down at her hands. "But when you're behind on rent and your daughter needs new shoes, everything feels personal." James nodded. He remembered the cold impersonality of being shuffled from foster home to foster home, always being told it wasn't personal. "What would this job mean to you?" Elena looked up at him, and James saw something in her eyes that reminded him of his younger self. Desperation mixed with determination. "It would mean Sophie and I could stay in our apartment. It would mean I could afford to put her in the after-school program she loves. It would mean—" She paused, her voice catching slightly. "It would mean I could stop being scared every day that I'm failing her." Across the room, Sophie had found a picture book about a princess and was quietly reading to herself, her lips moving with each word. James watched her for a moment, then turned back to Elena. "You're not failing her. Anyone can see that girl is loved and well cared for." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back quickly. Some days it doesn't feel like enough. James made a decision that surprised even him. Elena, I'd like to offer you the position. The salary is $60,000 a year to start, with full benefits including health insurance and dental. There's also an emergency fund available for employees facing hardship. Elena stared at him, her mouth slightly open. Are you serious? Completely serious. You can start Monday if you'd like. But you haven't even asked me about my experience or tested my skills or... Your resume speaks for itself. And frankly, anyone who can manage a household budget on freelance income while raising a child has better financial skills than half the people I know. Elena covered her face with her hands, and James worried for a moment that he had overwhelmed her. But when she looked up, she was smiling through tears. Thank you, she whispered. You have no idea what this means to us. James looked over at Sophie, who had noticed her mother crying and was walking over with concern. Mommy, are you okay? Elena pulled her daughter into a hug. I'm perfect, baby. Better than perfect. Sophie looked at James with those big brown eyes that had haunted his dreams. Are you the job man who's going to help Mommy? James knelt down so he was at her eye level. I hope so, Sophie. I really hope so. As Elena and Sophie left his office, James watched them through his window as they walked down the street. Elena was practically bouncing with each step and Sophie was skipping beside her. For the first time in years, James felt like he had done something that mattered more than profit margins and quarterly reports. He didn't know it yet, but that simple act of kindness was about to change all three of their lives in ways none of them could imagine. 3 months before that life-changing phone call, Elena Martinez had been sitting on her bathroom floor at 2 a.m, surrounded by bills and fighting back tears. Sophie was finally asleep after an hour of bedtime stories, and this was the only time Elena allowed herself to fall apart. The eviction notice was crumpled in her hand. 30 days to pay 3 months' rent or lose their home. She had $67 in her checking account and a 7-year-old daughter who still believed her mother could fix anything. Elena had always been a fighter. Growing up as the oldest of 4 children in a household where her father worked 2 jobs and her mother cleaned houses, she learned early that nothing came easy. She had put herself through community college while working nights at a grocery store, determined to build a better life than the one she had known. When she got pregnant with Sophie at 21, everyone told her it would ruin her plans. Her boyfriend, Sophie's father, certainly thought so. He left when Elena was 4 months pregnant, saying he wasn't ready to be a father and probably never would be. But Sophie had never felt like a burden to Elena. If anything, she had been Elena's motivation to work harder, to dream bigger, to never give up. Every late night studying while pregnant, every early morning feeding followed by classes, every sacrifice had been worth it when she graduated with honors and landed her first real accounting job. For 3 years things had been good. Elena had a steady income, a nice apartment, and Sophie was thriving in school. Elena even started putting money away for Sophie's college fund, something her own parents had never been able to do. Then came the downsizing. Budget cuts, they said. Nothing personal. Elena was called into her supervisor's office on a Tuesday morning and told that Friday would be her last day. Just like that, 3 years of hard work and dedication meant nothing. Elena had tried to stay positive at first. She had skills, experience, and good references. She would find something else quickly. But as weeks turned into months and her savings dwindled to nothing, panic began to set in. The freelance bookkeeping work she picked up barely covered groceries. She started working nights at a diner, but that meant leaving Sophie with Mrs. Garcia, their elderly neighbor who refused to take payment but clearly struggled with watching an active 7-year-old. Elena sold everything she could, her jewelry, her good furniture, even her car. They relied on public transportation and walking, which was fine until Sophie got sick and Elena had to miss work to take care of her. The worst part wasn't the financial stress, though that kept Elena awake most nights. The worst part was watching Sophie try to be brave for her. Mommy, I don't need new shoes, Sophie had said when Elena explained they couldn't afford them yet. These ones still work fine. The shoes had holes in the soles, and Elena's heart broke watching her daughter step carefully around puddles. Sophie had stopped asking for things. No requests for toys or treats when they passed stores. No complaints when Elena said they couldn't afford to eat out or go to movies. Sophie seemed to understand at 7 years old that money was tight and every dollar mattered. The night before Elena was supposed to interview at Richardson Industries, she had practiced her answers one more time in the bathroom mirror. This job could save them. The salary would be enough to get caught up on rent, to buy Sophie new clothes, to stop living in constant fear of the next bill. Elena had bought the navy dress from a thrift store, spending $15 she couldn't really afford because she knew first impressions mattered. She had researched the company for hours, memorizing details about their services and recent projects. She was ready. Then Mrs. Garcia called that morning, crying because she had fallen and needed to go to the hospital. Elena's carefully constructed plans crumbled in an instant. She had sat on her bed, holding the phone and watching Sophie eat cereal for breakfast, trying to decide what to do. She could leave Sophie alone for a few hours. The interview wouldn't take long. But Sophie was only 7, and Elena had heard too many horror stories about what could happen to children left unsupervised. She could try to reschedule, but the job market was competitive. How many chances would she get? In the end, the decision was easy. Sophie's safety came first, always. Elena would rather live in their car than risk something happening to her daughter. She had called the company to cancel but got voicemail. Probably for the best, Elena thought. She wasn't sure she could explain the situation without crying. As the day wore on, Elena's hope faded completely. She had lost her last real chance at stability. The eviction notice was still on her kitchen counter, and she had no idea how she was going to tell Sophie they might lose their home. When the phone rang that afternoon and Sophie answered it, Elena had been in the bathroom crying as quietly as she could. She heard Sophie talking to someone and panicked, thinking it might be the landlord or a bill collector. But when she took the phone and heard James Richardson's voice, something in her chest loosened slightly. He didn't sound angry. He sounded kind. The offer to bring Sophie to the interview seemed too good to be true. Elena had learned not to trust things that seemed too good to be true. But she was desperate enough to hope, just this once, that maybe the universe was throwing her a lifeline. That night, Elena helped Sophie pick out her best dress. A little blue sundress that matched Elena's interview outfit. They practiced sitting quietly and using indoor voices. "Are we really going to see the job man's castle?" Sophie asked as Elena tucked her into bed. "It's not a castle, baby. It's just an office building. But it's going to be big and fancy, right? Like in the movies?" Elena smiled, smoothing Sophie's hair. "Maybe. But remember, I'm going there to work, not to play. So you'll need to be very good while Mommy talks to the job man." "I'll be the goodest ever," Sophie promised. "I want you to get the job so we don't have to sleep in the car." Elena's throat tightened. She thought she had hidden their financial troubles from Sophie, but children were more perceptive than adults gave them credit for. "Everything's going to be okay, Sophie. Mommy's going to figure it out." As Elena turned off the light and closed Sophie's door, she whispered a prayer she hadn't said since childhood. She wasn't asking for miracles, just for a chance. A chance to prove herself, to provide for her daughter, to build the life Sophie deserved. She had no way of knowing that her prayer was about to be answered by a man who had grown up just as scared and desperate as she was, and who saw something in her story that reminded him of his own journey from nothing to everything. The next morning, as Elena and Sophie walked toward Richardson Industries, Elena took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. Whatever happened in that interview, she would face it with dignity. She owed Sophie that much. The next few days after the interview passed in a blur for Elena. She kept expecting to wake up from what felt like an impossible dream. A job paying $60,000 a year with benefits and an emergency fund? Things like that didn't happen to people like her. But Friday morning, Patricia called to confirm Elena's start date and to arrange for her to pick up paperwork. Elena spent the weekend in a state of nervous excitement, alternating between planning their new budget and worrying that somehow the offer would be taken away. Sophie seemed to sense her mother's mood and was extra well-behaved, helping Elena organize their small apartment and picking out clothes for her first day of work. "Mommy, when you start your new job, can we get the apartment with the better playground?" Sophie asked on Sunday evening as they shared a box of mac and cheese for dinner. Elena's heart squeezed. Sophie never complained about their tiny apartment with the broken air conditioning and the neighbors who played loud music at all hours. But Elena had noticed her daughter looking longingly at the nicer complex across town when they walked by. "Maybe, baby. Let's see how things go first." Monday morning came faster than Elena expected. She had arranged for Sophie to go to Mrs. Garcia's before school, and the elderly woman was thrilled to hear about Elena's new job. "I told you something good would happen," Mrs. Garcia said, hugging Elena tightly. "You deserve this, Mija." Richardson Industries occupied 3 floors of a downtown building, and Elena felt intimidated all over again as she walked through the marble lobby. She wore her navy interview dress again. It was still her nicest outfit. Patricia greeted her warmly and spent the morning showing Elena around the office and introducing her to her co-workers. Elena tried to memorize everyone's names and roles, wanting to make a good impression. Her desk was in the accounting department, a bright space with large windows overlooking the city. Elena had never had such a nice workspace before. At her previous job, she had been stuck in a windowless cubicle in the basement. "Mr. Richardson wanted me to give you this," Patricia said, handing Elena a folder. "It's information about our employee benefits, including the child care assistance program." Elena opened the folder and nearly gasped. The company would pay up to $500 per month toward child care expenses. That was more than enough to cover Sophie's after-school program and still have money left over. This is incredible," Elena murmured. "Mr. Richardson believes in supporting working parents," Patricia explained. "He says children shouldn't suffer because their parents have to work." Elena looked up toward James's office, visible through glass walls on the floor above. She could see him in a meeting, gesturing animatedly as he spoke to several people in suits. He looked every inch the successful businessman, and Elena still couldn't quite believe he had shown such kindness to her and Sophie. The work itself was challenging but engaging. Elena was tasked with reviewing financial reports for several of the company's major clients, looking for inconsistencies in areas where costs could be reduced. It was exactly the kind of analytical work she loved, and she threw herself into it with enthusiasm. Around noon, Elena was deep in a complex spreadsheet when she heard a familiar voice. "How's your first day going?" She looked up to see James Richardson standing beside her desk, looking less formal than he had during the interview. His tie was loosened and he had rolled up his sleeves. "Very well, thank you. The work is fascinating and everyone has been so welcoming." James nodded, glancing at her computer screen. "That's the Morrison account. Tricky one. They've been hemorrhaging money for months but can't figure out where." Elena hesitated, then decided to speak up. "Actually, I think I might have found something. Their supply chain costs have increased by 30% over the past year, but their supplier rates haven't changed." James leaned closer to look at her screen, and Elena caught a hint of his cologne. Something expensive but not overwhelming. "Show me." Elena pulled up several reports, pointing out the discrepancies she had noticed. Someone's been ordering supplies through a middleman company instead of going directly to the manufacturer. The middleman is charging significantly more for the same products. James studied the numbers, his expression growing more interested. "How did you catch this?" "Our senior accountants have been looking at this for weeks." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I used to manage purchasing for a small business in addition to their books. You learn to spot these kinds of markups when every penny matters." "Impressive." James straightened up and Elena noticed he was smiling. "Would you mind writing up a report on this? I think Morrison is going to be very interested in your findings." After James left, Elena sat at her desk feeling stunned. She had been working for less than 4 hours and had already contributed something valuable. At her previous job, she had rarely been asked for her opinion on anything. The rest of the day flew by. Elena found herself staying late not because she had to, but because she was genuinely engaged in the work. When she finally looked at the clock, it was past 6. She hurried to Mrs. Garcia's apartment to pick up Sophie, feeling guilty for being late on her first day. "Mommy?" Sophie launched herself into Elena's arms. "How was your first day at the castle?" "It was wonderful, baby. How was school?" "Good. Mrs. Garcia made me cookies and I finished all my homework." Elena looked at the elderly woman gratefully. "Thank you so much for watching her. Let me pay you?" No, Mrs. Garcia waved her hand dismissively. "You save your money. I love having this little angel around." That evening, as Elena helped Sophie with her bath, her daughter chattered excitedly about her day. But Elena noticed Sophie kept glancing at her with a curious expression. "What is it, baby? You look different, Mommy." "Different how?" Sophie scrunched up her nose, thinking. "Happy different. Like when we watch movies with happy endings." Elena's throat tightened with emotion. She had been so focused on surviving day to day that she hadn't realized how much stress she had been carrying, or how it must have affected Sophie. "I'm happy, Sophie. Very happy." "Is it because of the job man? He was nice to us." Elena thought about James's kindness, how he had listened to her ideas and treated her with respect. "Yes, partly because of Mr. Richardson. But mostly because things are getting better for us." That night, after Sophie was asleep, Elena sat at her kitchen table and did something she hadn't done in months. She made a budget that actually worked. For the first time since losing her previous job, she could pay all their bills and still have money left over. She even allowed herself to dream a little. Maybe they could move to that apartment complex with the better playground. Maybe she could take Sophie to dinner at a real restaurant, not just fast food. Maybe she could start rebuilding Sophie's college fund. As Elena got ready for bed, she found herself thinking about James Richardson. He was clearly intelligent and successful, but there had been something else in his eyes during their conversation about the Morrison account. He had looked proud of her work. Elena shook her head, telling herself not to read too much into it. He was her boss, nothing more. But as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't help but wonder what had motivated him to give her such an incredible opportunity. She had no way of knowing that 3 floors above her, James was sitting in his empty office, thinking about her obvious passion for the work and the joy on her face when she talked about her discoveries. He couldn't remember the last time he had seen someone so genuinely excited about a spreadsheet. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities for both of them. But tonight, for the first time in months, Elena Martinez fell asleep without worrying about how she would take care of her daughter. 2 weeks into Elena's employment at Richardson Industries, she had settled into a comfortable routine. She arrived early, worked diligently, and often stayed late because she genuinely enjoyed the challenges of her job. Her insights had already saved 3 clients significant amounts of money, and her reputation within the company was growing. But Elena remained cautious around James Richardson. She was grateful for the opportunity he had given her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that his kindness was too good to be true. In her experience, when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. James, for his part, found himself looking forward to their brief interactions. Elena had a way of approaching problems that impressed him. She was thorough, creative, and never afraid to challenge conventional thinking. But more than that, there was something about her quiet determination that reminded him of his younger self. The shift in their relationship began on a Thursday afternoon when Elena was working late on a particularly complex audit. Most of the office had cleared out by 6, but Elena was deep in concentration, surrounded by papers and multiple computer screens. "You're here late again." Elena looked up to see James standing nearby, jacket slung over his shoulder and briefcase in hand. She glanced at the clock and was surprised to see it was nearly 7. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how late it was. I can finish this tomorrow." "Don't apologize. I'm impressed by your dedication. But don't you need to get home to Sophie?" Elena's cheeks flushed slightly. "Mrs. Garcia is watching her. She insists she doesn't mind, but I hate imposing on her so much." James frowned. "What about the after-school program? I thought you were going to enroll Sophie." "I am. Next week, actually. I just wanted to make sure." Elena trailed off, looking embarrassed. "Make sure what?" Elena hesitated, then decided to be honest. "I wanted to make sure I was going to work out here before I started spending money on things like that." James set down his briefcase and looked at her seriously. "Elena, do you think I'm going to fire you?" "Not exactly, but..." Elena sighed. "Mr. Richardson, I've learned not to count on good things lasting. I need to be practical." Something in her tone made James pause. He could hear echoes of his younger self in her words. The caution born from too many disappointments, the fear of hoping for too much. "Have you eaten dinner?" he asked suddenly. The question caught Elena off guard. No, not yet." "Neither have I. There's a diner a few blocks from here. Nothing fancy, but they make excellent coffee and pie. Would you like to join me?" Elena stared at him, completely bewildered. "You want to have dinner with me? Is that so strange? You're the CEO of a major company. I'm sure you have better things to do than eat diner food with an employee." James smiled, and Elena noticed it transformed his entire face. "Actually, I can't think of anything I'd rather do right now." 20 minutes later, they were sitting across from each other in a red vinyl booth at Murphy's Diner, a place that reminded James of the establishments where he had washed dishes as a teenager. Elena seemed nervous, fidgeting with her coffee cup and glancing around as if she expected cameras to pop out. "Relax," James said gently. "This isn't a performance review." "Then what is it?" James considered the question. "A conversation between 2 people who work too much and don't get out enough." Elena cracked a small smile at that. "When you put it like that, it sounds almost normal." "Tell me about Sophie," James said, settling back in the booth. "What's she like?" Elena's entire demeanor changed when she talked about her daughter. Her face lit up, and her voice became animated as she described Sophie's love of reading, her curiosity about everything, and her surprisingly mature outlook on life. "She wants to be a teacher when she grows up," Elena said, stirring her coffee. "She says she wants to help kids learn to read like she did." "How did she learn to read?" "I taught her when she was 4. We couldn't afford preschool, so I made up games and activities. She was reading chapter books by kindergarten." James found himself genuinely impressed. That's remarkable. You should be proud. I am. She's the best thing I've ever done. There was a moment of comfortable silence, and then James surprised himself by asking, "What about Sophie's father?" Elena's expression tightened slightly. "He's not in the picture. His choice." "I'm sorry." Elena shrugged, but James could see the hurt she was trying to hide. "His loss. Sophie and I do just fine on our own." "I'm sure you do. But it can't be easy." Elena looked at him curiously. "You sound like you speak from experience." James hesitated. He rarely talked about his childhood, even with people he had known for years. But something about Elena's honesty made him want to reciprocate. "I grew up in foster care. Bounced around from home to home until I aged out at 18. Elena's eyes widened. "I had no idea. I'm sorry." "Don't be. It taught me to be self-reliant. But I never had to worry about anyone else's welfare. I can't imagine having that responsibility for a child while trying to build a life." Elena studied his face, seeing something vulnerable there that he usually kept hidden. "Is that why you helped us? Because you understand what it's like to have nothing?" James nodded slowly. "Partly. But also because when Sophie answered that phone, something in her voice reminded me that there are things more important than business." They talked for another hour, sharing stories about their childhoods, their struggles, and their dreams. Elena found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months. James was nothing like the intimidating CEO she had imagined. He was thoughtful, funny, and surprisingly easy to talk to. "I should get home," Elena finally said, glancing at her watch. "Mrs. Garcia will be wondering where I am." "Of course. I'll drive you." "You don't have to." "Elena, it's almost 9 o'clock and you're taking the bus. I'm driving you home." As they sat in James's car outside Elena's apartment building, she turned to him with a serious expression. "Thank you for tonight. And for everything. I know you didn't have to help us." "Yes, I did," James said quietly. "Maybe not legally but morally?" "Absolutely." Elena looked at him for a long moment, then made a decision. "Would you like to come up and meet Sophie? She's probably still awake." James felt his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. "Are you sure? She's been asking about you. The job man from the castle, as she calls you." James followed Elena up 2 flights of stairs to a small but tidy apartment. Elena opened the door to find Sophie sitting on the couch in her pajamas, reading a book while Mrs. Garcia dozed in a nearby chair. "Mommy?" Sophie jumped up and ran to Elena. "You're home. Mrs. Garcia made me dinner and we watched a movie and I finished my reading for tomorrow." "That's wonderful, baby." Elena smoothed Sophie's hair. "Sophie, remember Mr. Richardson from my work? He gave me a ride home." Sophie looked up at James with those big brown eyes that had haunted his dreams weeks ago. "Hi, job man. Thank you for being nice to my mommy." James knelt down to Sophie's level. "Thank you for sharing your mommy with me at work. She's doing a great job." "I know. Mommy's really smart. She helps me with my math homework and she can fix almost anything." James glanced at Elena, who was blushing slightly. "She sounds pretty amazing." "She is. Do you want to see my book? It's about a girl who goes on adventures." Before James could answer, Sophie had grabbed his hand and was leading him to the couch, chattering about the story. James found himself sitting in the small living room, listening to a 7-year-old explain the plot of her book while Elena thanked Mrs. Garcia and walked her to the door. When Elena returned, she found James and Sophie deep in conversation about the book's characters. Sophie was curled up beside him on the couch, completely comfortable with this man she barely knew. "Sophie trusts you," Elena observed after James had said goodnight and they had put Sophie to bed. "She's a good judge of character, then?" Elena walked James to the door, suddenly aware of how small and shabby her apartment must seem to someone who could afford anything. "Elena," James said as he reached for the door handle, "I want you to know that your job is secure. You don't have to keep proving yourself. You've already proven more than enough." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you. That means more than you know." After James left, Elena stood in her doorway for a moment, processing what had just happened. Her boss, her billionaire CEO boss, had just spent the evening eating diner food with her and reading stories with her daughter. It didn't make any sense, but somehow it felt right. The next morning at work, Elena wondered if things would be awkward between them. But James greeted her with the same professional warmth as always, asking about her current projects and offering insights when she needed them. The only difference was a subtle shift in their dynamic. The walls of formality had come down slightly, replaced by a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. Elena no longer felt like she was walking on eggshells, and James found himself looking forward to their brief conversations throughout the day. Neither of them acknowledged it directly, but something fundamental had changed between them that night at Murphy's diner. They were no longer just employer and employee. They were two people who had recognized something in each other, a shared understanding of what it meant to fight for a better life. And in the weeks that followed, that understanding would grow into something neither of them expected, but both of them desperately needed. 3 weeks after their dinner at Murphy's diner, Elena had found her rhythm at Richardson Industries. She arrived each morning with growing confidence, tackled complex financial analyses with enthusiasm, and had even started contributing ideas during team meetings. Her colleagues had begun seeking her input on difficult cases, recognizing her unique perspective and thorough approach. But success came with its own challenges. Elena quickly realized that not everyone was happy about her rapid rise within the company. "I heard she got the job because she has some sob story about being evicted," Elena overheard Jessica Walsh, one of the senior accountants, whispering to a colleague in the break room. Richardson has always been a sucker for charity cases. Elena's cheeks burned, but she forced herself to walk calmly to the coffee machine and pour her cup without reacting. She had dealt with jealousy and gossip before, but it still stung. "Maybe we should all start bringing our kids to interviews," Jessica continued with a laugh. "Seems like that's what gets you hired around here." Elena's hand tightened on her coffee mug. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that she had earned her position through skill and hard work, not sympathy. But she also knew that engaging would only make things worse. "Is there a problem here?" Elena turned to see James standing in the doorway of the break room, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp. Jessica's face went pale. "Oh, Mr. Richardson. We were discussing the Morrison project." "Were you?" "Because what I heard sounded more like workplace gossip, which, as you know, goes against company policy." Jessica stammered an apology, quickly gathering her things and leaving. The other employee followed, leaving Elena alone with James. "You didn't have to do that," Elena said quietly. "Yes, I did. That kind of behavior is unacceptable and it stops now." Elena sipped her coffee, trying to process her feelings. Maybe she has a point though. Maybe people do think I got special treatment. James stepped closer, his voice firm but gentle. "Elena, look at me. You have saved this company thousands of dollars in just 1 month. Your work on the Morrison account alone paid your salary for the entire year. You earned your place here." Despite his reassuring words, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched and judged by her colleagues. She started staying later to double-check her work, determined to prove that she belonged. James noticed the change in Elena's behavior immediately. She seemed more guarded, less likely to speak up in meetings, and he often saw her working alone long after others had gone home. One evening he found her in the office at nearly 8 o'clock, surrounded by stacks of reports and looking exhausted. "Elena, what are you still doing here?" She looked up, startled. "Just finishing up the quarterly review for the Henderson Group. I want to make sure everything is perfect." James frowned, walking over to look at her work. The analysis was incredibly thorough, more detailed than necessary, really. "This is excellent work, but you've been here since 7 this morning. That's 13 hours. I want to make sure I'm pulling my weight." "You're pulling more than your weight. You're exhausting yourself trying to prove something you've already proven." Elena rubbed her temples, feeling a headache building. "It's just, some people think I don't belong here. I need to show them they're wrong." James sat down in the chair beside her desk. "Elena, I've been running this company for 15 years. Do you know what I've learned in that time?" She shook her head. "You can't control what other people think about you. You can only control the quality of your work and your own integrity. And both of those are beyond reproach." Elena felt tears threatening and blinked them back quickly. "It's just hard sometimes. I've never worked anywhere this elite before. I feel like I'm from a different world." "You are from a different world," James said simply. "And that's exactly why your perspective is so valuable." Before Elena could respond, her phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and frowned. It was Mrs. Garcia. "I'm sorry, I need to take this," she said to James, then answered the phone. "Mrs. Garcia? Is everything okay?" James watched Elena's face go pale as she listened to the voice on the other end. "Is she hurt? Which hospital?" Elena was already grabbing her purse and jacket. "I'll be right there." She hung up and turned to James, panic in her eyes. "Sophie fell at the playground. Mrs. Garcia thinks her arm might be broken. I have to get to the hospital." "I'll drive you," James said immediately. "You don't have to. Elena, your daughter is hurt. We're not arguing about this." 20 minutes later, They were rushing through the emergency room doors of St. Mary's Hospital. Elena's heart was pounding as she approached the reception desk. "I'm looking for Sophie Martinez. She's 7 years old, came in with a possible broken arm." The nurse checked her computer. "Room 8. Follow the hallway to your left." Elena practically ran down the hallway with James close behind her. They found Sophie sitting on an examination table, her left arm in a temporary sling, talking animatedly to Mrs. Garcia despite the tears on her cheeks. "Mommy?" Sophie's face lit up when she saw Elena. Elena rushed to her daughter's side, carefully examining her for injuries. "Are you okay, baby? Does it hurt a lot?" "It hurts some, but the doctor said it's not too bad. Mrs. Garcia bought me a juice box from the machine." Elena looked at the elderly woman gratefully. "Thank you so much for staying with her." "Of course, Mija. I wasn't going to leave her alone." A young doctor entered the room carrying X-ray films. "Mrs. Martinez? I'm Dr. Patel. Sophie has a simple fracture of her left radius. It's a clean break and should heal perfectly with a cast." Elena felt weak with relief. "Thank God. How long will she need the cast?" 6 to 8 weeks. We'll need to see her back in 2 weeks to check how it's healing." As Dr. Patel explained the care instructions, Elena tried to focus on his words while mentally calculating the cost. She had insurance now, but emergency room visits and follow-up care would still be expensive. James, who had been quietly observing from the corner of the room, noticed Elena's worried expression. When the doctor left to prepare discharge papers, he approached her. "What's wrong?" "Sophie's going to be fine." Elena nodded, but he could see the stress in her eyes. "I know. This is going to be expensive. And I'll need to miss work for the follow-up appointments." "Elena, you have excellent insurance through the company. And you have sick days for exactly this kind of situation." "I've only been there a month. I can't start missing work already." James placed a gentle hand on Elena's shoulder. "You're not missing work. You're taking care of your daughter, which is exactly what you should be doing. Anyone who has a problem with that can answer to me." Sophie looked up at James from her position on the examination table. "Job man, are you here because I broke my arm?" "I'm here because your mommy was worried about you, and I wanted to make sure you were okay." Sophie considered this seriously. "That's very nice of you. Do you want to sign my cast when I get it?" The doctor said people can write their names on it. James felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. "I would be honored to sign your cast, Sophie." 2 hours later, Sophie was sporting a bright pink cast and chattering excitedly about showing it to her classmates. Elena had filled out the discharge paperwork, trying not to think about the bills that would be coming in the mail. As they walked to James's car, Sophie tugged on Elena's sleeve. "Mommy, can the job man come have dinner with us tomorrow? Mrs. Garcia is making her special soup, and she always makes too much." Elena looked at James apologetically. "Sophie, Mr. Richardson is probably busy." "Actually," James interrupted, "that sounds wonderful. If Mrs. Garcia doesn't mind the extra company." "She loves company," Sophie said happily. "And she'll want to hear all about the hospital adventure." As James drove them home, Elena found herself stealing glances at him in the rearview mirror. He had dropped everything to help her when Sophie was hurt, stayed at the hospital for hours, and now he was coming to dinner in their small apartment like it was the most natural thing in the world. She was beginning to realize that James Richardson was nothing like the cold, distant billionaire she had imagined. He was kind, thoughtful, and seemed to genuinely care about her and Sophie's well-being. What Elena didn't know was that James was having similar thoughts about her. Watching her with Sophie in the hospital, the fierce protectiveness, the gentle comfort, the way she put her daughter's needs above everything else, had reminded him of what real love looked like. As they pulled up to Elena's apartment building, James realized that somewhere along the way, Elena and Sophie Martinez had become more than just people he was helping. They had become people he cared about deeply. And that realization was both thrilling and terrifying. The dinner at Elena's apartment the following evening marked a turning point in their relationship. James arrived with flowers for Elena and a book about brave princesses for Sophie, who proudly showed off her pink cast to anyone who would listen. Mrs. Garcia had indeed made too much soup, and the four of them crowded around Elena's small kitchen table, sharing stories and laughter. James found himself more relaxed than he had been in years, listening to Sophie's animated descriptions of her day at school and watching Elena's face light up when she laughed. "Mr. James," Sophie said, using the name she had decided suited him better than job man, "do you have any kids?" Elena shot her daughter a warning look. "Sophie, that's a personal question." "It's okay," James said gently. "No, Sophie, I don't have any children." "Why not?" Don't you want any? Elena's cheeks flushed. Sophie, that's enough. But James seemed genuinely thoughtful about the question. I always thought I was too busy for a family. I spent so much time working that I never really considered it. That's sad, Sophie said matter-of-factly. Families are the best part of life. Right, Mommy? Right, baby, Elena agreed, though she was still embarrassed by her daughter's bluntness. After dinner, James helped Elena clean up while Sophie did her homework at the kitchen table. It felt domestic and comfortable in a way that surprised them both. She's amazing, James said quietly, watching Sophie concentrate on her math problems. She is. Sometimes I can't believe she's mine. James turned to look at Elena, who was drying dishes with a soft smile on her face. You're an incredible mother, Elena. Sophie is lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one. She makes everything worth it. Over the following weeks, James found himself spending more and more time with Elena and Sophie. What started as occasional check-ins about work evolved into regular dinners, weekend trips to the zoo, and quiet evenings helping Sophie with homework. Elena tried to maintain appropriate boundaries, reminding herself that James was her boss and this was just kindness, not anything more. But it was becoming harder to ignore the way her heart raced when he smiled at her, or how natural it felt when the three of them were together. James was fighting his own internal battle. He had never allowed personal relationships to interfere with work, but Elena and Sophie had become the highlight of his days. He looked forward to Elena's insights during meetings and counted the hours until he could see them both in the evenings. The shift became impossible to ignore during Sophie's school play in early November. Elena had mentioned that Sophie was playing a tree in the kindergarten production of The Seasons, and James surprised himself by asking if he could attend. You really want to watch a bunch of 7-year-olds sing about autumn leaves? Elena asked, amused. I want to see Sophie perform. If that's okay with you. Elena felt her heart skip. She would love that. The night of the play, James sat beside Elena in the crowded school auditorium, watching Sophie wave enthusiastically from her position as tree number 3. When Sophie's solo moment came, one line about leaves falling gently, James found himself beaming with pride as if she were his own daughter. She's a natural performer, he whispered to Elena. Elena nodded, trying not to cry at the sight of James clapping enthusiastically for her daughter. No man had ever shown interest in Sophie's activities before. Her father had never even sent a birthday card, let alone attended a school play. After the performance, Sophie ran up to them, still wearing her tree costume. Mr. James, did you see me? I remembered all my words. You were brilliant, James said, kneeling down to her level. The best tree I've ever seen. Sophie giggled and threw her arms around his neck in an impulsive hug. James felt something shift in his chest as he hugged her back, a fierce protectiveness and love he had never experienced before. Later that evening, after James had driven them home and Sophie was in bed, Elena found herself struggling with emotions she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Thank you for coming tonight, she said as James prepared to leave. It meant a lot to Sophie. To both of us. I wouldn't have missed it, James replied, and Elena could tell he meant it. They stood in her doorway for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Elena was acutely aware of how close James was standing, how easy it would be to close the distance between them. Elena, James said softly, I need to tell you something. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What is it? James paused, seeming to reconsider his words. I care about you and Sophie very much. Both of you have become incredibly important to me. Elena felt her breath catch. James? I know this is complicated. I'm your boss and I don't want you to feel pressured or uncomfortable. But I needed you to know how I feel. Elena looked into his eyes and saw vulnerability there that matched her own feelings. It is complicated. But what I feel for you, it's not because you're my boss or because you helped us. It's because of who you are. James stepped closer, his hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. What are we going to do about this? I don't know, Elena whispered. All I know is that when I'm with you, everything feels right. James leaned down slowly, giving Elena time to pull away if she wanted to. When she didn't, he pressed his lips to hers in a soft, tender kiss that felt like coming home. When they broke apart, Elena rested her forehead against his. This changes everything, she said. Maybe it was supposed to change, James replied. Maybe we were both ready for something different. That night, as Elena lay in bed replaying the evening, she allowed herself to hope for something she had never dared dream of before. A real partnership, a complete family, a love that could weather any storm. In his own apartment across town, James stared out at the city lights and realized that his carefully ordered world had been turned upside down by a woman and her daughter who had taught him what really mattered in life. Neither of them knew that their newfound happiness was about to be tested in ways they couldn't imagine. But for tonight, it was enough to know that they had found something precious in each other. Everything changed on a cold Tuesday morning in December. Elena was at her desk, reviewing quarterly reports and humming softly to herself, a habit she had developed since finding happiness with James and stability at work. The past month had been like a dream, with quiet dinners, weekend adventures, and the growing certainty that what she and James shared was real and lasting. Sophie had started calling James almost Daddy when she thought Elena couldn't hear, and while Elena corrected her gently, she couldn't deny the warmth the nickname brought to her heart. Elena's phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. She glanced at the caller ID and frowned. It was Sophie's school. "This is Elena Martinez." "Ms. Martinez, this is Principal Johnson at Lincoln Elementary. Sophie is fine, but we have a situation here that requires your immediate attention." Elena's heart clenched. What kind of situation? A man came to the school claiming to be Sophie's father. He has identification and what appears to be a birth certificate. He's demanding to take Sophie with him. The world seemed to tilt around Elena. She gripped her desk, fighting off a wave of nausea. "Don't let him near her. I'm on my way." Elena grabbed her purse and jacket, her hands shaking as she tried to think clearly. Danny Reeves, Sophie's biological father, hadn't shown any interest in his daughter for 7 years. Why was he here now? "Elena, what's wrong?" James appeared at her desk, having noticed her obvious distress. "It's Sophie. Her father, he's at the school trying to take her." Elena's voice cracked with panic. "I'll drive you," James said immediately, already reaching for his keys. They made the 20-minute drive to Lincoln Elementary in 12 minutes, James breaking several speed limits while Elena called her lawyer, a legal aid attorney she had consulted when Sophie was born. "Miss Chin, it's Elena Martinez. Sophie's father is trying to take her from school. What are my rights?" The lawyer's response made Elena's blood run cold. "If he's on the birth certificate and there's no custody order in place, he has equal parental rights. You need to get to a courthouse immediately and file for emergency custody." Elena hung up and turned to James, tears streaming down her face. "He can take her. Legally, he can just take her." James reached over and squeezed her hand. "We won't let that happen." They arrived at the school to find a tense scene in the principal's office. Sophie sat in a corner chair, looking small and frightened, while a man Elena barely recognized argued with Principal Johnson. Danny Reeves looked nothing like the charming 21-year-old who had promised Elena forever and then disappeared when she needed him most. He was thinner now, with hollow cheeks and restless eyes that suggested trouble. "Daddy?" Sophie looked up at Elena with confusion and fear. Elena's heart broke at the uncertainty in her daughter's voice. Sophie had no memory of Danny. He had been gone since she was 6 months old. "It's okay, baby. I'm here." Elena knelt beside Sophie's chair, pulling her daughter into a protective embrace. "Elena." Danny's voice was different too, harder, with an edge that made Elena's skin crawl. "You look good. Success suits you. What do you want, Danny?" Elena stood, keeping Sophie behind her. "I want to get to know my daughter." "That's not unreasonable, is it?" Danny's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I've been thinking about her a lot lately." Elena noticed James standing silently near the door, his expression unreadable but his posture tense. She was grateful for his presence but terrified about what Danny might do if he realized who James was. "You gave up any right to know Sophie when you walked away 7 years ago," Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I was young and scared. I'm different now. I have rights as her father." Principal Johnson stepped forward. "Mr. Reeves, as I explained, we cannot release Sophie to anyone without proper documentation and Ms. Martinez's consent." "I have documentation." Danny pulled out a folder. "Birth certificate, DNA test results, and a consultation with a lawyer who says I have every right to take my daughter." Elena's world crumbled as she looked at the papers. Everything appeared legitimate. Danny had clearly planned this carefully. "Why now?" Elena asked, her voice barely a whisper. Danny's mask slipped for just a moment, and Elena saw something calculating in his expression. "I told you. I want to be a father to Sophie." But Elena knew Danny well enough to recognize when he was lying. There was something else driving this sudden interest in fatherhood. "I'll need time to consult with my attorney," Elena said. "That's fine. I'm not going anywhere." Danny's smile was cold. "In fact, I'll be picking Sophie up from school tomorrow." We have a lot of catching up to do. Sophie pressed closer to Elena, clearly frightened by this stranger who claimed to be her father. I want to go home with Mommy, Sophie said in a small voice. Of course you do, sweetheart, Danny said, kneeling down to Sophie's level. But I'm your daddy, and daddies and daughters should spend time together. Elena saw Sophie's confusion and fear, and her protective instincts roared to life. You're not taking her anywhere until this is sorted out legally. Elena, I don't want to make this ugly, but I will if I have to. Sophie is my daughter too. After what felt like hours of tense negotiation, they agreed that Danny would not take Sophie that day, but that he would return the next morning with his lawyer to discuss visitation arrangements. As they drove home, Sophie was unusually quiet in the back seat. Mommy, do I have to go with that man? She finally asked. Elena's heart shattered. I don't know, baby. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you're safe. That evening, Elena paced her apartment while James made phone calls to every lawyer he knew. Sophie sat on the couch, pretending to read but clearly listening to every word. I found someone, James said, hanging up the phone. Catherine Mills. She's one of the best family law attorneys in the state. She'll see us first thing in the morning. Elena nodded, but she could barely focus. Why is he really here, James? Danny never wanted anything to do with Sophie. Why now? James hesitated, then decided Elena needed to know the truth. I had someone look into his background. He's in debt, serious debt. The kind that has consequences if you don't pay. Elena felt sick. You think he wants money? I think he wants leverage. He knows you have a good job now, and he knows. James paused. He knows about us, Elena finished. He's going to try to use Sophie to get money from you. The thought of Danny using Sophie as a pawn in some scheme to extort money made Elena's blood boil. But it also terrified her because it meant Danny might actually fight for custody if he thought it would be profitable. We'll figure this out, James said, pulling Elena into his arms. I promise you we won't let him hurt Sophie. But as Elena held her daughter that night, listening to Sophie's quiet sobs and whispered fears about the strange man who wanted to take her away, she wondered if love would be enough to protect the family she had worked so hard to build. The battle for Sophie's future was just beginning, and Elena had never been more frightened in her life. The emergency custody hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning, giving Elena and James just 2 days to prepare their case. Catherine Mills, the family attorney James had found, was a sharp woman in her 50s who specialized in complex custody disputes. The situation is challenging, Ms. Mills explained during their Wednesday evening meeting. Danny Reeves has established paternity and has legal standing to seek custody or visitation. However, his 7-year absence works in our favor. Elena sat beside James in the law office, her hands clenched in her lap. What are his chances of actually getting custody? Slim, given his abandonment of Sophie. But visitation is more likely. Courts generally favor maintaining relationships between children and both parents, even flawed ones. He doesn't want a relationship with Sophie, Elena said bitterly. He wants something else. Ms. Mills nodded. We suspect as much. My investigator found some interesting information about Mr. Reeves' financial situation. He owes significant money to some very unpleasant people. James leaned forward. What kind of people? The kind who break legs when debts aren't paid. Danny needs money fast, and he's clearly identified Elena's new circumstances as an opportunity. Elena felt sick. So Sophie is just a means to an end for him. Most likely. But we need to prove that in court, which won't be easy. That night, Elena barely slept. She checked on Sophie 3 times, each time finding her daughter tossing restlessly in her small bed. At dawn, Elena found Sophie awake, staring at the ceiling. I'm scared, Mommy, Sophie whispered. Elena climbed into bed beside her daughter, holding her close. I know, baby. I'm scared too. But Mr. James and I are going to do everything we can to keep you safe. What if the judge makes me go with him? I don't want to leave you. Elena's throat tightened. That's not going to happen. You belong with me, and I will never let anyone take you away. The courthouse was intimidating with its marble columns and echoing hallways. Sophie held Elena's hand tightly as they walked to the family court division, James beside them like a protective shield. Danny was already there with his lawyer, a thin man in an expensive suit who looked like he specialized in making people miserable. Danny had cleaned up for court, new clothes, fresh haircut, and a practiced expression of paternal concern. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Hendricks. Judge Hendricks was a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Elena felt a small spark of hope. Perhaps this judge would see through Danny's act. Danny's lawyer went first, painting a picture of a reformed man who had made mistakes in his youth but was now ready to be a father to his daughter. He spoke about Danny's rights as a biological parent and his desire to build a relationship with Sophie. Your Honor, Danny's lawyer concluded, my client is not seeking to disrupt Sophie's life, merely to be a part of it. He's willing to start with supervised visitation and work toward a more substantial custody arrangement. Ms. Mills stood to respond and Elena held her breath. Your Honor, Mr. Reeves abandoned his daughter when she was 6 months old. For 7 years he has provided no financial support, made no attempt at contact and shown no interest in Sophie's welfare. His sudden appearance coincides suspiciously with Ms. Martinez's improved financial circumstances. Objection, Danny's lawyer called. Speculation. Sustained, Judge Hendricks said. Ms. Mills, please stick to facts. Ms. Mills nodded. The facts, Your Honor, are that Sophie doesn't know this man. She is frightened by his sudden appearance in her life. Forcing visitation would be traumatic for a 7-year-old child who has formed strong attachments to her current family structure. Elena winced at the indirect reference to James. She had hoped to keep him out of the proceedings, but it was becoming clear that wouldn't be possible. Judge Hendricks looked directly at Elena. Ms. Martinez, I'd like to hear from you. What are your concerns about Mr. Reeves having contact with Sophie? Elena stood on shaky legs. Your Honor, Danny left when I was pregnant. When I tried to contact him after Sophie was born, he made it clear he wanted nothing to do with us. Sophie has never known him as a father, and his sudden appearance has terrified her. Has he been abusive or threatening? Elena hesitated. Danny hadn't technically threatened them, but his presence felt menacing. He's intimidating. Sophie is afraid of him and she's never been afraid of anyone before. Judge Hendricks made notes then looked at Danny. Mr. Reeves, what changed? Why are you seeking custody now after 7 years of absence? Danny stood, his lawyer beside him. Your Honor, I was young and irresponsible when Sophie was born. I've spent the past few years getting my life together, and I realized I wanted to be part of my daughter's life. I know I made mistakes, but I'm ready to be a father now. What kind of relationship are you seeking with Sophie? I'd like to start with weekend visitation, Your Honor. Maybe take her on trips, show her things she's never seen before. She deserves to know her father. Elena's heart raced. Weekend visitation would give Danny ample opportunity to manipulate or frighten Sophie. She couldn't let that happen. Judge Hendricks turned to address the room. I'm going to call a brief recess to review the case files. When we return, I'll render my decision. During the break, Elena found herself shaking uncontrollably. James pulled her into a quiet corner of the hallway. Whatever happens, we'll handle it, he said firmly. What if she grants him visitation? What if he takes Sophie and disappears? What if... Elena, stop. We can't control what the judge decides, but we can control how we respond to it. Elena looked up at him, this man who had become so important to both her and Sophie. James, I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest. Always. If this gets ugly, if Danny makes trouble for you or your company, will you walk away from us? James looked stunned by the question. Elena, how can you even ask that? Because I need to know. Sophie and I have survived on our own before. We can do it again if we have to. But I need to know if you're going to be here when things get difficult. James took her hands in his voice fierce with conviction. Elena, listen to me. You and Sophie are not just people I'm helping anymore. You're my family. The only real family I've ever had. I would fight the entire world to protect you both. Elena felt tears spill over. Even if it costs you everything? You and Sophie are everything. Everything else is just money and buildings. Before Elena could respond, they were called back into the courtroom. Judge Hendricks had returned, and her expression was unreadable. After reviewing all the evidence and testimony, Judge Hendricks began, I find that while Mr. Reeves has legal standing as Sophie's biological father, his 7-year absence from her life cannot be ignored. Elena held her breath. However, I also believe that children benefit from knowing both parents when possible. Therefore, I am ordering supervised visitation to begin immediately. Elena's heart sank, but Judge Hendricks wasn't finished. The visitation will be supervised by a court-appointed social worker and will take place at the Family Services Center. Mr. Reeves will have 2 hours every other Saturday for the next 3 months. At the end of that period, we will reassess based on Sophie's adjustment and Mr. Reeves' consistency. Danny's lawyer looked disappointed. Clearly they had hoped for more. Elena felt a small measure of relief that Sophie wouldn't be alone with Danny. Furthermore, Judge Hendricks continued, I am ordering both parents to attend family counseling to help Sophie adjust to this change. Mr. Reeves, any missed visitations or failure to comply with court orders will result in suspension of your parental rights. As they left the courthouse, Elena felt emotionally drained. They had won a partial victory, but the fight was far from over. That evening, as Elena tried to explain to Sophie what would happen, her daughter's reaction broke her heart. Do I have to talk to him, Mommy? The judge says you need to visit with him sometimes, but a nice lady will be there to make sure you're safe. Sophie was quiet for a long moment. Will you be there too? No, baby. But Mr. James and I will be waiting right outside the whole time. Sophie climbed into Elena's lap, something she rarely did anymore at 7 years old. I don't want a daddy I don't know. I want Mr. James to be my daddy. Elena's eyes filled with tears as she looked at James, who was sitting across the room. He looked stricken by Sophie's words. Sometimes we don't get to choose our family, Elena said gently. But we can choose who we love. That night, after Sophie was finally asleep, Elena sat on her couch feeling defeated. James sat beside her, both of them processing the day's events. I keep thinking about what Sophie said, Elena murmured. About wanting you to be her father. James was quiet for a moment. I keep thinking about it too. Elena turned to look at him. James, where do you see this going? I see forever, he said simply. I see marriage and adoption papers and Sophie never having to worry about Danny Reeves again. Elena's breath caught. Are you proposing to me? James smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him all day. Not yet. When I propose to you, Elena Martinez, it's going to be perfect. But I wanted you to know that's where my heart is. Elena felt warmth spread through her chest for the first time since Danny had reappeared in their lives. And if the custody battle gets worse? If Danny causes problems? Then we'll handle it together. All three of us. 2 weeks later, at Sophie's first supervised visit with Danny, Elena and James sat in the waiting room of the Family Services Center. Through a one-way window, they could see Sophie sitting stiffly across from Danny while a social worker facilitated their conversation. Danny was trying too hard, bringing expensive toys and making grand promises about places he would take Sophie. But anyone could see that Sophie was uncomfortable and confused. He's not connecting with her, Elena observed. No, he's not. And she's smart enough to sense that something isn't right about his motivations. Elena watched her daughter politely thank Danny for a doll she clearly didn't want, and her heart ached. Sophie was being forced to pretend enthusiasm for a relationship that felt wrong to her. After the visit, Sophie climbed into Elena's arms without saying a word. It wasn't until they were in James's car that she finally spoke. He asked me lots of questions about where we live and what Mr. James does for work, Sophie said quietly. Elena and James exchanged glances. Danny was fishing for information just as they had suspected. What did you tell him? Elena asked gently. I said I don't know much about grown-up stuff. The nice lady said I didn't have to answer questions that made me uncomfortable. Elena silently blessed the social worker for protecting Sophie from Danny's interrogation. That night, as Elena tucked Sophie into bed, her daughter asked a question that stopped Elena's heart. Mommy, if you married Mr. James, would he be my real daddy? Elena sat on the edge of Sophie's bed, choosing her words carefully. Marriage doesn't automatically make someone a parent, baby. But if Mr. James adopted you, then yes, he would legally be your father. Could we do that? Could we make Mr. James my real daddy so the scary man would go away? Elena felt tears threaten. It's complicated, Sophie. But maybe someday. I hope someday comes soon, Sophie whispered, then closed her eyes. As Elena stood in Sophie's doorway watching her daughter sleep, she made a decision. She was tired of being afraid, tired of letting Danny control their lives through fear and manipulation. Tomorrow she would ask Ms. Mills about the adoption process. If James was serious about forever, then maybe it was time to make their family official in the eyes of the law. The battle for Sophie's future wasn't over, but Elena was ready to fight for the life they all deserved. 6 months after the custody hearing, Danny Reeves had missed 4 of his scheduled visitations and shown up late to 3 others. Each time Sophie was supposed to see him, she grew anxious and withdrawn, and each time he failed to appear, Elena felt a mixture of relief and frustration. The breaking point came on a rainy Saturday in April. Sophie had been sick with a stomach bug all week, but Danny insisted on his visitation despite the social worker's suggestion to postpone. She's fine, Danny argued when Elena tried to explain that Sophie needed rest. A little fresh air will do her good. But Sophie wasn't fine. 20 minutes into the visit, she vomited in the Family Services Center bathroom and had to be taken home. Danny's response was to demand makeup time, claiming Elena had deliberately made Sophie sick to sabotage his visitation. The incident prompted an emergency hearing, where Judge Hendricks reviewed the social worker's reports with growing concern. "Mr. Reeves," the judge said sternly, "you have been inconsistent in your visitations, you have made demands that are not in Sophie's best interest, and according to the social worker's reports, you spend most of your time with Sophie asking inappropriate questions about her mother's personal life." Danny's lawyer started to object, but Judge Hendricks held up her hand. Furthermore, Sophie has shown signs of anxiety and stress directly related to these visitations. A child's well-being must come before any adult's desires. Elena held her breath, hardly daring to hope. "Therefore, I am suspending Mr. Reeves' visitation rights pending a full psychological evaluation of Sophie to determine the impact of these visits on her emotional health." Danny exploded. "This is ridiculous. You can't keep me from my daughter." "Mr. Reeves, I strongly suggest you lower your voice in my courtroom," Judge Hendricks said coldly. "If the evaluation shows that visitation is harmful to Sophie, I will consider terminating your parental rights entirely." As they left the courthouse, Elena felt lighter than she had in months. But she knew the real battle was just beginning. That evening, James found Elena and Sophie in their apartment's small kitchen, making cookies together. Sophie was chattering happily about her day at school, and Elena was smiling more freely than she had since Danny's reappearance. "Good news from court?" James asked, kissing Elena's cheek and ruffling Sophie's hair. "The best," Elena said, then explained the judge's decision. Sophie looked up from the cookie dough she was mixing. "Does this mean I don't have to see the scary man anymore?" "Maybe, baby. We'll have to wait and see what the judge decides." Sophie considered this seriously. "Mr. James, if I don't have to see him anymore, could you adopt me for real?" James knelt down to Sophie's level, his heart full of love for this brave little girl. "Sophie, there's nothing I would like more than to be your father officially. But we have to wait for the grown-up stuff to get sorted out first." "How long will that take?" Elena and James exchanged glances. They had been discussing marriage and adoption for months, but the custody battle had complicated everything. "Not too much longer, I hope," James said. 3 weeks later, Dr. Sarah Chin, the court-appointed child psychologist, submitted her report to Judge Hendricks. Elena and James sat in Ms. Mill's office as she read the key findings aloud. "Sophie shows significant anxiety related to visits with her biological father," Dr. Chen had written. "She has expressed fear, confusion, and a strong desire to avoid these interactions. In contrast, she demonstrates a secure, loving attachment to her mother and to James Richardson, whom she refers to as her chosen daddy." Elena felt tears of relief. Ms. Mills continued reading. "Sophie has created a fantasy narrative in which James Richardson legally adopts her and Danny Reeves disappears from her life. While this might seem like wishful thinking, Sophie's distress about the current situation is genuine and concerning." "What does this mean for our case?" Elena asked. "It means we have strong grounds to petition for termination of Danny's parental rights based on abandonment and emotional harm to the child." The final hearing was scheduled for the first week of June. Danny made one last attempt to maintain his rights, hiring a new lawyer and claiming he had been seeking treatment for his issues. But his credibility was destroyed when Elena's investigator revealed that Danny owed nearly $50,000 to various creditors and had been bragging to friends about his plan to cash in on his rich daughter. Judge Hendricks was not impressed. "Mr. Reeves, you have consistently prioritized your financial needs over your daughter's emotional well-being. You have used court-ordered visitation as an opportunity to gather information for what appears to be an extortion scheme. This court finds that you have abandoned your parental responsibilities and that continued contact with you would be detrimental to Sophie's welfare." Elena gripped James's hand as the judge continued. "Therefore, I am terminating Mr. Reeves' parental rights effective immediately. Sophie Martinez is free to be adopted by any qualified parent her mother chooses." Danny stormed out of the courtroom, but Elena barely noticed. She was too busy crying tears of joy and relief. That evening, James asked Elena and Sophie to meet him at their favorite park, the place where they had shared many happy afternoons over the past year. Sophie was swinging while Elena sat on a nearby bench, still processing their victory in court. "Elena," James said, approaching her with an unusual nervousness in his manner, "could you ask Sophie to come here for a minute?" Elena called Sophie over, curious about James's behavior. He seemed excited but anxious, like someone about to take a leap of faith. "Sophie," James said, kneeling down so he was at her eye level. You know how much I love you and your mommy, right? Sophie nodded solemnly. We love you too, Mr. James. Well, I've been thinking about what you said about wanting me to be your real daddy. And I was wondering. James pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, and Elena's breath caught. How would you feel if I asked your mommy to marry me? Sophie's eyes went wide with excitement. Really? You want to marry mommy and be my daddy? More than anything in the world. But I need to know if that's what you want too. Sophie threw her arms around James's neck. Yes. I want you to be my daddy forever. James hugged Sophie tightly, then turned to Elena, who was crying and laughing at the same time. Elena Martinez, James said, opening the ring box to reveal a beautiful but elegant diamond ring. You and Sophie have given me the only real family I've ever known. Will you marry me? Will you let me adopt Sophie and be the father she deserves? Elena looked at this man who had changed their lives so completely, who had fought for them and loved them unconditionally. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes, of course yes. James slipped the ring onto Elena's finger while Sophie danced around them, cheering. Other park visitors began to applaud, sensing the joy of the moment. Are we really going to be a family now? Sophie asked, bouncing with excitement. We already are a family, Elena said, pulling both James and Sophie into a group hug. Now we're just making it official. 6 months later, on a snowy December morning, Elena and James were married in a small ceremony attended by their closest friends, Mrs. Garcia, and most importantly, Sophie, who served as both flower girl and ring bearer. The adoption papers were finalized the following week, with Sophie proudly signing her new name, Sophie Richardson, in careful 7-year-old handwriting. On Christmas morning, their first as an official family, Sophie woke up to find a special gift under the tree, a custom-made picture book titled, The Story of Sophie's Family, featuring illustrations of their journey from that first phone call to their wedding day. As Elena and James watched Sophie read the book aloud, they marveled at how much their lives had changed. A simple act of kindness during a moment of desperation had blossomed into something neither of them had dared to dream of. I have a question, Sophie announced, looking up from her book. What's it, sweetheart? James asked, pulling her onto his lap. When I grow up and have kids, will you tell them the story about how you became my daddy because mommy answered the phone wrong? Elena and James laughed, remembering that terrifying day when Sophie had told a stranger about sleeping in cars and changed all their lives forever. I'll tell them that sometimes the best things happen when you're brave enough to answer the phone, James said, kissing the top of Sophie's head. And that families aren't just made by birth, Elena added. They're made by love and choice and the willingness to take care of each other no matter what. Sophie nodded seriously, then grinned. I like our story. It has a really good ending. As snow fell outside their new home, a house with a big backyard and excellent schools that they had chosen together, Elena Richardson smiled at her husband and daughter. Sophie was right. Their story did have a really good ending. But more than that, it was just the beginning of their forever.